The wind howled like a wounded animal, slicing through the timber walls of the tiny frontier cabin. Snow slammed against the shutters, trying to break in. Inside, silence, except for the ragged breath of a young woman hunched beside a dying fire, clutching two wailing newborns to her chest. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale from cold and fever. Her husband had died 3 days ago, and the snow hadn't stopped since. Supplies were gone. Hope was fading. Every creak outside sent panic down her spine. Was it the wind or wolves? Then, a sound, foreign but steady. Hoofbeats. Closer, and then silence. The door creaked open. A figure stepped in, wrapped in furs, eyes sharp as a hawk's, face shadowed by a snow-dusted hood. A Comanche hunter. But was he salvation or something else? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something truly special just for you. The sky above the western frontier was an endless stretch of pale gray, thick with clouds that promised more snow. Winter had arrived early that year, hard and unforgiving, spreading its icy grip across the vast plains of Texas territory. Even the hardiest of settlers were beginning to break under its weight. Amelia Rhodes stood just outside her cabin, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, her breath visible in the air. Her boots cracked the frost beneath her as she stared into the distance, eyes hollow with exhaustion. She was only 24, but grief had aged her. Her auburn hair, once thick and lively, now hung limp beneath her bonnet. Her once rosy cheeks had turned sallow. A week ago, she had a husband, a future, and the promise of a new life in the wilderness. Now she had none of that. Only twin babies barely a few days old, and a land that had no mercy for the weak. Her husband, Thomas Rhodes, had gone out in the storm to fetch firewood and never returned. She found him 3 days later, buried beneath a snowdrift with his axe still in hand, his body stiff and blue. Now, each day was a test of survival. The wind sneaked through the cracks in the walls, the roof leaked, and the wolves had begun circling closer each night. The nearest settlement was nearly 20 miles away, an impossible distance with newborns and a blizzard tearing across the land. Inside the cabin, a small fire crackled weakly. 2 tiny forms stirred beneath a blanket on the cot. Amelia turned back in, her movements slow, mechanical. She no longer cried. She had no tears left. She fed the babies from a dwindling supply of goat's milk and then held them close, whispering lullabies that sounded more like prayers. The twins, Daniel and Ruth, were all she had now. Their lives depended entirely on her, and though her body was failing, her will held fast. Still, doubt gnawed at her. How long could she keep them alive? Their cabin sat on the edge of the Brazos River, deep in Comanche territory. The land was rich, but dangerous. The U.S. Army had tried to settle it, forcing the native tribes out, but many still roamed, their movements unpredictable. Settlers spoke in hushed tones about raids, missing families, and strange markings found carved into trees. Fear was as common as dust. But Amelia never feared the Comanche. Not truly. Her mother had once whispered to her that the land had a soul, and it chose who would live or die on it. Amelia wasn't sure if the land had chosen her or abandoned her. The closest neighbor, an elderly trapper named Silas Crick, hadn't been seen in weeks. He was a grizzled man with a crooked smile and one eye, who'd once warned Amelia, "If the cold don't kill you, the silence will." There was one other, Sheriff Cole Anders, a former Union soldier who now ruled the nearest settlement with a badge and a battered rifle. He'd taken a liking to Amelia, but Thomas had never trusted him. Neither did Amelia. Something about the man's eyes. They looked at people the way a butcher looks at meat. But none of them were here now. Just her and the twins. And something watching from the trees. Amelia had felt it for days. A presence. No animal. Something silent. Intelligent. She'd catch movement out of the corner of her eye, shadows slipping between trees. At first, she thought it was grief playing tricks. But now she wasn't sure. She winced as she moved to stoke the fire, her fingers brushing against the long scar along her ribs. A mark she never spoke of, not even to Thomas. One she'd received long before they left Virginia. one tied to a past she had buried deep beneath layers of silence and good behavior. The blizzard returned that night with renewed fury. Snow fell in thick waves, and wind howled through the trees like a chorus of mourning spirits. Inside, the babies cried, hungry and cold. Amelia held them both close, humming softly to calm them. And then, the sound of hoofbeats. Faint at first, then louder, closer. She froze. Was it a rider? A soldier? Or something worse? Danger had found her at last, but so had something else. Something unexpected. A man, wrapped in furs, his skin tanned by sun and wind, his expression unreadable. A Comanche hunter. He stepped into the light of her flickering fire with the quiet grace of a predator, eyes scanning her face, the children, the room. Why had he come? What did he see in her that made him stay? And what secret did he carry across his shoulders like the bow on his back? The storm was just beginning, and fate had brought two strangers into its eye. The Comanche hunter said nothing at first. He stood just inside the cabin's threshold, snow melting from his furs, pooling at his feet. His dark eyes flicked across the room, settling briefly on Amelia, then the children, then the barely burning fire. The babies whimpered, and he took one slow step forward, his presence both foreign and strangely calm. Amelia backed up instinctively, pulling the twins closer. Her voice trembled. Please, I have nothing to steal. He didn't answer. He simply knelt beside the fire, pulled a pouch from beneath his robe, and sprinkled something into the flames. A sharp, herbal scent filled the air, like pine needles mixed with something spicier. The flames leapt higher, orange and alive. Warmth returned to the room, if only briefly. I'm not here to steal, he said at last, his voice low, gravelly, and marked with a thick accent. You're dying. All three of you. Amelia stared. You speak English? He nodded once. Enough to know you need help. His name, she would later learn, was Takota, friend to all in his tongue. A scout and hunter, exiled from his band for reasons he did not share. His presence was a mystery. Why had he found them? Why now? But there was no time to question. That night, as the storm beat harder against the walls, he worked without rest. He reinforced the door with branches, boiled a strange root into tea, and used his own cloak to wrap the twins. Amelia watched him with suspicion and awe. He moved like someone born to survive the wild, his every motion purposeful, and he never asked for anything in return. But just as hope began to flicker, danger crashed through the door. Literally. It happened 2 days later. The sky had cleared briefly, casting a ghostly light over the snow-covered trees. Amelia stepped outside with Takota to gather firewood when she heard it, a distant shout, followed by the crack of a rifle. Takota pushed her behind the woodpile instinctively. 3 riders came barreling through the woods, faces masked, coats torn, weapons drawn. Outlaws. Bandits. The worst kind. One of them shouted, "There she is." Amelia froze. They weren't random. They had come for her. Takota reached for his bow, loosed an arrow with terrifying speed, and struck the lead rider in the thigh. The man screamed and tumbled off his horse. The others ducked behind trees, firing blindly into the woods. Takota turned to Amelia. Run. Take the children. Go out the back. But now, she didn't hesitate. Heart pounding, she raced back inside, scooped up the twins, and fled out the back into the trees, snow blinding her as branches clawed at her shawl. Behind her, gunfire echoed. Screams. A final yell, then silence. She waited in the brush, holding her breath as the babies squirmed quietly. When she finally dared to peek out, the cabin was in flames. No, no, no. Her home. Everything. Gone. She found Takota an hour later. Bleeding. Exhausted. But alive. They wanted you, he said, voice hoarse. They weren't strangers. Amelia's legs gave out. She collapsed into the snow. She knew who had sent them. Sheriff Cole Anders. Before she and Thomas left Virginia, she'd worked in a clerk's office, handling property ledgers for wealthy families. One night, she discovered a string of forged land claims, written in a familiar hand. The sheriff's. She tried to report it. The next day, Her employer disappeared, and Sheriff Anders showed up at her door with a smile that chilled her blood. "You didn't see anything," he'd said, "and you don't want to." She and Thomas left the next week, fled west, changed their names, started over. But the past, it had found her. Dakota said nothing as she revealed the truth, his face unreadable. "They won't stop," Amelia whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "They'll keep coming." Dakota looked toward the distant smoke curling into the cold sky. "Then we go where they can't follow." She looked down at her babies, then at the hunter, her only ally in this vast, cruel land. The wind had shifted. The danger was no longer just the storm. It was a man in a badge, miles away, with a long memory and no mercy. She nodded. "Where do we go?" Dakota didn't answer. He only held out his hand. They disappeared into the wild that night. One mother, two infants, and a warrior who didn't belong anywhere. But somewhere behind them, Sheriff Anders was already preparing to ride. And this time, he wasn't coming alone. The forest seemed endless, each tree a silent witness to their flight. Amelia's legs trembled with every step through the waist-deep snow. Her arms ached from holding both babies wrapped tightly against her chest. Behind her, Dakota moved like a shadow, silent, watchful, carrying little but a blade and his bow. For days, they trudged through the wilderness. They followed frozen riverbeds, scaled icy ridges, and crossed barren plains so wide it felt like they'd fallen off the edge of the world. Dakota never complained. He hunted what little could be found: rabbits, squirrels, roots hidden beneath frost. Amelia did what she could, but each breath was a battle. Her hands blistered, her shoes wore thin, and sleep became a luxury stolen in fitful bursts between the baby's cries and the endless fear that someone was following. They didn't speak much, but when they did, it mattered. "Why are you helping me?" she asked one night, huddled near a fire, her babies asleep between them. Dakota stared into the flames, his voice low. "I've seen too many left behind." He said no more, and Amelia didn't press. But she saw the pain in his eyes, like he, too, was running from something. By the seventh day, their food was nearly gone. A freezing wind whipped through the trees, and the babies had begun to cough. Amelia's heart seized with every rasp. They reached the abandoned mission in the hills just before the storm hit. A crumbling stone chapel, long deserted, its roof sagging but walls still solid. Inside, dust coated everything, but it was shelter. That night, as snow buried the world again, Dakota laid a hand on Amelia's shoulder. "I need to go. Hunt. Bring back medicine." Amelia froze. "You're leaving us here alone?" He met her eyes. "You want them to live? I must go. I'll be back." He left without another word. She watched his figure disappear into the trees and suddenly felt the crushing weight of being alone again. The mission's shadows pressed in. Every creak of the old beams made her flinch. That night, as she sang to the twins, someone knocked. A soft, deliberate knock. She froze. Her hand reached for the small knife Dakota had given her. Another knock. Then the door creaked open. It wasn't Dakota. The man who entered was tall, pale, and wore the coat of a Confederate soldier, though the war had ended years ago. His eyes were cold, and a jagged scar split his lip. He didn't speak, only stepped in, his boots thudding on the stone floor. "Who are you?" Amelia demanded, her voice trembling. He didn't answer, just looked at the twins, then at her. Before she could react, a voice rang out behind him. "She asked you a question." Dakota. He was back, arrow notched, aimed at the stranger's throat. The man raised his hand slowly. "Easy, friend. Just a traveler. Saw the smoke." Dakota didn't lower the bow. His voice was calm, but deadly. "You walked through a blizzard to a ruined church in the middle of nowhere, just for shelter?" The man smiled faintly. "Well, you did." After a tense silence, Dakota motioned with his bow. "Leave." The man backed out slowly, never turning his back. As soon as he was gone, Dakota secured the door and looked at Amelia. "Scouts. Sheriff's men. He'll return." They moved again by dawn. The storm had calmed, but the danger hadn't. Dakota led them through a rocky canyon, keeping low. Amelia followed, carrying the babies, her fear replaced by growing dread. They weren't just being hunted. They were being tracked. Along the trail, they found signs. Hoofprints, ash from a fresh fire, a torn piece of cloth Amelia recognized, part of the twins' old swaddle. Her stomach turned. He's close, Dakota said, eyes scanning the ridge. He wants you alive. But he'll kill me. Amelia stopped. Why? Why do you care what happens to me? You barely know me. Dakota paused. His jaw clenched. Because once, I failed someone. It was the first crack in his armor. They pressed on, and Amelia began to see him differently. Not just a warrior, but a man burdened by ghosts. She watched how he calmed the babies when she couldn't. How he slept with one eye open, always between her and the cold. And in quiet moments, she saw the flicker of something human in his eyes. Something kind. But trust didn't come easy. And neither did survival. They reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley where Dakota said an old Comanche ally might offer shelter. It was their last hope. But when they arrived, the lodge was burned to the ground. Blackened wood, charred furs, the smell of smoke still lingering. Dakota knelt, touched the ashes, and whispered something in his native tongue. It was him, he said, standing. Sheriff Anders. Amelia felt it then, the noose tightening. They had nowhere left to run. No one to trust. And worse, she realized something chilling. He doesn't just want me silenced, she said. He wants the land. Dakota looked at her, confused. Amelia's hands trembled as she pulled a small leather pouch from beneath her cloak. She hadn't shown it to anyone, not even Thomas. Inside, a folded map. Old, faded, but unmistakable. My father, he was a surveyor. Before he died, he gave me this. It marks a spring, buried deep beneath these hills. Whoever owns this land controls it. Water, gold, everything. Dakota stared at her. You had this all along? I didn't think it mattered, she whispered. Not until now. Now, everything made sense. The sheriff didn't just want revenge, he wanted power. And Amelia, she was the key. Dakota's face hardened. Then he won't stop. Not until he owns your blood. They made camp one final time in a cave high above the valley. That night, as the fire flickered low and the twins slept between them, Amelia looked at Dakota. You could leave, she said. You don't owe me anything. He met her gaze, and for a long time, said nothing. Then, quietly, I stay because I choose to. For the first time, Amelia reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but neither did he move closer. The moment hung between them, unspoken, tender, unfinished. Below them, in the darkness, torchlights moved like fireflies through the trees. Sheriff Anders had found them, and there was no more time to run. The wind howled through the cave mouth, flinging snow into their fire. Amelia clutched the map in trembling hands, eyes locked on the faint ink lines drawn decades ago by her father. Dakota studied it beside her, his brow furrowed. It's more than a spring, he said finally. This valley feeds 3 rivers. Whoever owns this land owns every trade route east of the Rockies. Amelia nodded. That's why Sheriff Anders wants me dead. A silence fell between them. But then Dakota added, almost to himself, and why your husband's death might not have been an accident. Amelia turned to him sharply. What? Dakota didn't blink. I've been thinking. You said he died during a supply run. Fell from a ridge. Yes, that's what I was told, she whispered. By who? Her voice faltered. The foreman who found his body. He said Thomas slipped on ice. Dakota's jaw tightened. I passed that ridge once. The trail's too narrow for horses. Only locals know how to cross it safely. What if he was pushed? Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. Why would someone? She stopped. Because she already knew the answer. Because Thomas knew about the map. Maybe he found out too late. Maybe he confronted someone. Maybe he trusted the wrong person. The realization struck her like lightning. Thomas hadn't died by accident. He had been silenced. Just like they were trying to silence her. She collapsed back onto the cold stone, tears stinging her eyes. He knew, and never told me. Dakota crouched beside her. He tried to protect you. He just ran out of time. Amelia looked up at him, grief giving way to something harder. Then I won't run anymore. Dakota nodded. But just as resolve settled in her chest, the cave echoed with a faint crunch, footsteps in snow. Dakota rose, bow drawn. Stay behind me. But it wasn't Anders. It was the Confederate-coated man from the mission. Only this time, He wasn't alone. Two others flanked him, both armed. One had a scarred face. The other was young, too young for the hatred burning in his eyes. "We were hoping you'd come up here," the leader said. "Makes things easier." Amelia clutched the twins close. Dakota stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man grinned. "Names don't matter much out here. Let's just say we're old friends of the sheriff." "Bounty hunters," Dakota muttered. "You got it." He tilted his head at Amelia. "You, Missy, you're worth more than we thought. Turns out there's a buyer back east willing to pay double to get that map back." Dakota's grip on his bow tightened. But then, from the shadows, a fourth figure stepped out. A woman, wrapped in furs, rifle slung over her shoulder, her blonde hair matted with snow. Amelia blinked in shock. Claire. Claire was the midwife who'd helped deliver the twins. A kind woman from the next settlement over. Someone Amelia had trusted. Claire gave her a soft smile, but there was something bitter behind it. "I told you to leave when Thomas died," she said. "I warned you, but you stayed. You clung to a dream that was never yours." Amelia stood, her voice shaking. "You helped them?" Claire's face darkened. "My family worked this land for 50 years, and your father's map would have handed it over to city folk with gold teeth and inked paper. You think I'd let that happen?" "You delivered my children," Amelia whispered. Claire's eyes flicked to the swaddled twins. "Which makes this harder?" Dakota stepped between them. "You won't touch her." The bounty leader raised his rifle. "I suggest you move." But Dakota was faster. In one swift motion, he loosed an arrow, striking the scar-faced man in the shoulder. Gunfire erupted. Claire dove behind a rock, yelling something Amelia couldn't hear. Dakota pushed Amelia back into the cave. "Go. Take the babies and the map. I'll draw them away." "No," she cried. "Not alone." But he didn't argue. He just gave her one last look. One that said everything they didn't have time to say. Then he vanished into the snow. Amelia ran. She ran through the back tunnel of the cave, clutching her children, her heart beating in her throat. Behind her, she heard gunshots, screams, and the echo of a voice she wasn't sure she'd ever hear again. She ran until her legs gave out, until the trees swallowed her. She collapsed beside an old cedar, gasping for air, her babies crying softly in her arms. And that's when she noticed. The map was gone. Not in her coat. Not in the sling. Gone. Dakota had taken it. Not to protect it, but to protect her. And now he was out there, alone, facing gunfire and betrayal, with nothing but a bow and a stolen map that could change the future of the entire valley. And she had no idea if he'd survive the night. Snow lashed the valley in sheets as if the sky itself had turned against them. Amelia stumbled through the drifts, her baby strapped close to her chest, every breath a burning stab in her lungs. Her mind reeled. Dakota was gone, taking the map, and now everything, depended on whether he was still alive. But she couldn't go back. Not yet. Not with the twins. She found temporary refuge in an old miner's shack, tucked against a cliffside. The roof sagged, the walls moaned with wind, but it was shelter. She wrapped the babies tighter, started a small fire with the last of her kindling, and stared into the flames. She wanted to cry, but there was no time. No luxury left for weakness. Then, from the storm, came hoofbeats. Amelia grabbed the knife Dakota left her. Her body shook. The door creaked open. But it wasn't a bounty hunter. It was Elias, Thomas's brother. His face was thinner than she remembered, and his eyes had gone hard and glassy. He stepped in, brushing snow off his shoulders, a rifle slung across his back. Amelia stood between him and the babies. "You're supposed to be in Kansas," she said. Elias didn't smile. "Got a letter. Heard what happened. You came all this way for family." He nodded, but there was something behind his gaze. Something cold. Not quite. He tossed something on the floor between them. A crumpled telegram. It was from Sheriff Anders. "Amelia holds the map. The Comanche won't leave her. Take it. Burn the rest." Amelia's blood ran cold. Elias shrugged. "It's nothing personal. Just business. You know Thomas was always the sentimental one." She was too stunned to speak. He looked at the babies, and for a moment, a flicker of something almost human crossed his face. "I didn't expect them to look so much like him." Amelia stepped forward, knife in hand. "You touch them, and I'll bury this blade in your throat." Elias smirked. "Still got fire. Shame it'll burn out here." He reached for his rifle, but before he could aim, a deafening crack split the air. The back wall of the shack exploded inward, and a figure surged through the snow. Dakota. His blade flashed. Elias stumbled back, shocked. Amelia grabbed the twins and hit the floor as the two men collided. Elias fired blindly, the shot sparking off the stone hearth. Dakota was faster. He slammed Elias into the wall, the impact rattling the whole shack. The rifle clattered to the floor. Dakota held Elias by the collar, eyes wild. You betrayed your own blood. Elias coughed, sneering. Blood don't matter. Land does. With a roar, Dakota punched him hard across the face. Elias slumped, unconscious. Dakota turned to Amelia, his chest heaving. Snow clung to his coat, and blood stained his side. You're hurt, she gasped. I'll live. Amelia looked at him, really looked. His hair was matted with snow, his face scraped raw from wind and branches. And yet he'd come back. He'd fought to return. She touched his arm gently. I thought you were dead. He stared at her a long moment. I was, until I met you. But there was no time for tenderness. Footsteps approached, dozens of them. Outside, the sound of horses neighing, men shouting, and boots crunching on ice grew louder. Sheriff Anders had found them. Dakota grabbed the map from his coat. We end this. Now. They climbed to the ridge, the place where Thomas had died. A narrow cliff path led to a ledge overlooking the valley. There, Dakota set the map down, lit a torch, and held it high. Within minutes, Anders and his men appeared below. Give me the girl, he shouted. And the map. We'll let the boy live. Dakota raised the torch over the edge. One step closer, and the land burns with it. Anders snarled. You won't do it. That map's your ticket to survival. Amelia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the wind. You killed my husband for this. Sent your dogs after me. Burned homes. Betrayed friends. Anders grinned up at her. And I'll do it again. You think the government cares about a half-dead widow and her savage friend? Dakota's hand trembled, but it was Amelia who took the torch from him. She held it to the map. Flames licked the edges. Anders screamed. No. Amelia's eyes burned, not with grief, but with purpose. You'll never own this land. She dropped the torch. The map ignited, flames curling across the parchment. Below, chaos erupted, men shouting, pushing, trying to scramble up the ridge. Dakota turned to her. They're coming. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Then we make our stand. They positioned themselves along the ridge, behind rocks and fallen trees. Dakota notched arrow after arrow. Amelia loaded Elias's rifle. The first wave came fast, 3 men charging up the path. Dakota dropped 2 before they reached the halfway mark. Amelia took the third, the rifle kicking hard into her shoulder. Her hands shook, but she loaded again. More came. The battle blurred into chaos, gunfire, screams, smoke. Dakota fought like a ghost, swift and brutal, but he was bleeding. Amelia reloaded until her hands were raw. Then, a shot rang out. Dakota staggered. Amelia screamed. He dropped to his knees, blood pouring from his side. Anders appeared behind him, gun smoking, a grin on his face. Should have stayed out of white men's wars, he sneered. Amelia aimed, pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Anders raised his revolver, aimed at the twins beside her. But before he could fire, a final arrow buried itself deep in his throat. He froze, eyes wide, then fell. Dakota, still breathing, lowered his bow. Amelia collapsed beside him. Stay with me, please. His voice was faint. Did we win? She nodded, sobbing. Yes. You saved us. He smiled weakly. Then that's enough. His eyes began to close. No, she whispered. You don't get to leave me. Suddenly, the wind shifted. From the woods, riders emerged, Comanche, Dakota's people. One of them dismounted, kneeling beside him. He's still breathing, the woman said. Barely. We'll take him. Amelia looked at the babies. Then at Dakota. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Not if she could help it. And so, with nothing left but love, blood, and a burning future behind them, they vanished into the snow. The snowstorm had passed. Morning light broke over the valley like a revelation, its golden fingers stretching across the blood-stained ridge where everything had changed. Smoke curled up from the blackened remains of the map, now ash and memory. And in the distance, the wind carried silence. Heavy. Final. Amelia paced outside the medicine lodge. Dakota had been unconscious for hours. The Comanche had worked tirelessly, hacking the wound with herbs, chanting soft prayers. But nothing was certain. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow. She clutched her children tight to her chest. I should have stopped him, she whispered to the wind. I should have never let him go back. Inside the tent, the medicine woman, Takota's aunt, emerged slowly. He fights still, she said in a low voice. But he is not only fighting death. He is fighting himself. Amelia blinked. What do you mean? The woman's eyes were old, sharp as flint. He carries more than wounds in his body. There is a wound in his spirit, a grief that never healed, a brother betrayed, a tribe that questioned his loyalty. He must choose whether to live or fade. Amelia turned to the lodge. Her heart cracked open. She knew what Takota carried. He had told her once, briefly, in a moment he hadn't meant to share. My brother walked into a white man's town to negotiate peace. He never came back. They sent me to find his body, but they already buried it, and not one of them remembered his name. She had seen the guilt in his eyes, the silent shame he carried for not being there. Now, he was slipping again, and she couldn't let him. She stepped into the lodge. Takota lay pale and still, his chest rising with effort. Amelia knelt beside him, took his hand in hers, and pressed her forehead to his. Don't you dare leave me. No response. She closed her eyes. I'm not going to lie and tell you the pain will go away. I won't promise peace or forgiveness. But I will promise this. If you stay, we will build something new. We'll make them remember your brother's name. We'll raise these children to speak truth, to walk with honor. She paused, her voice shaking. And if you want to be angry with me. But don't you leave. Because I'm not brave without you. I never was. A long silence. Then, a breath. Deeper. Stronger. Takota's fingers twitched against hers. His eyes opened. Weak, but clear. You talk too much, he rasped. She laughed and sobbed all at once. You stubborn, beautiful fool. He smiled faintly. Did we win? You came back to life. That's all the winning I need. He squeezed her hand. Not done yet. 2 weeks later. The valley looked different without snow. The melt revealed scars, burnt trees, shattered trails, but also life. Wildflowers pushed through the mud. Deer crept cautiously through the brush. And Amelia stood atop the ridge with the twins in her arms and Takota beside her, on his feet, barely, leaning on a carved walking stick. Below them, settlers gathered. And Comanche riders. Together. The first peace meeting of its kind. It hadn't been easy. It had taken messages carried by Takota's friends, letters written by Amelia, and the threat of the land being claimed by outside forces if they couldn't settle it themselves. But it was happening. She stepped forward to speak, her voice steady. My name is Amelia Cartwright. This land nearly broke me. It took my husband. It almost took my children. But it gave me something too. It gave me truth. She looked at the settlers. This land was not ours to take. She looked at the Comanche. But we can share it. We can protect it together, or lose it to those who care only for gold and timber. She held up a copy of the map, not the original, but a version drawn by hand, with input from both sides. This is no longer a map of ownership. It's a map of home. The crowd murmured. One of the elders, a tall man with silver braids, nodded. Then let it begin. And so it did. Later that night, Takota sat by the fire, his legs still weak, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. Amelia approached, the twins asleep on her back. You kept your promise, she said. So did you, he replied. She sat beside him, staring into the flames. Do you ever think about leaving? Starting over somewhere else? He shook his head. This is my brother's land. My father's. Yours. Ours now. A silence settled between them. Then he looked at her. I serious. There's one more truth. She turned. What is it? He hesitated. I was the one who told your husband about the spring. About the map. We talked often. He came to me behind the settlers' backs. Said he wanted peace. A place to raise his children. I believed him. Amelia's breath caught. Takota continued, voice heavy. If I hadn't trusted him, he might still be alive. Amelia looked at him for a long time. Then she reached out and took his hand. He died believing this place could be beautiful. And you didn't betray him. You gave him hope. He blinked, his throat tightening. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And you gave it to me too. The fire cracked between them, warm and alive. And above, the stars stretched wide, silent witnesses to a land that, finally, had a chance to heal. Spring arrived with shy blossoms and a breeze that no longer cut like knives. The valley had changed, but not just from the snowmelt or the graves now marked by stones and respect. It had changed because something impossible had been born here. Hope. Amelia stood in the open field where the battle had taken place. Grass now grew where blood once stained the earth. The twins toddled at her feet, chasing a butterfly, their giggles rising like music through the breeze. Nearby, Dakota carved a piece of cedar into the beginnings of a flute. His legs still bore the wound of that night, and he walked with a slight limp, but his eyes had lost the weight they once carried. The grief hadn't disappeared. It never would, but it had transformed into purpose, into fire tempered by peace. The land was being shared now, not in speeches or signatures, but in real things: water rights, hunting zones, trading posts, and hands extended where guns once pointed. The settlers had laid down roots without fencing off what didn't belong to them. And the Comanche, they still rode free, but now they stopped to teach, to trade, to speak. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever would be, but it was real. Amelia walked to Dakota and sat beside him on the fallen log. He didn't look up, just handed her a small wooden pendant carved into the shape of a hawk in flight. "For you," he said simply. She turned it over in her hand. "What does it mean?" "It means you survived the storm," he said, eyes still on the sky. "And now you're ready to fly." She smiled, then grew quiet. "You ever think about what would have happened if we'd never found each other?" He glanced at her, a slow, steady look. "Then I would have died in that storm." They sat in silence, the wind whispering around them. "I still dream about Thomas sometimes," she admitted. "He's never angry, just watching, as if he's waiting to see what I do next." Dakota nodded. "Then make him proud." She exhaled deeply, laying her head on his shoulder. "We already did." 1 year later, the small schoolhouse was built near the river, its walls painted by hand with symbols, both English letters and Comanche pictographs. Children ran around it laughing, shouting in 2 languages, not thinking twice about what their names meant or where their bloodlines came from. Inside, Amelia taught reading and writing. Dakota taught stories and survival, how to listen to the land, how to see what others missed. It was a life neither of them had planned. It had grown from fire and loss, and it was theirs. One day, a rider came from the east, dust-covered, dressed in army gray, with a seal on his satchel and a question in his eyes. He asked for Amelia by name, handed her a letter. She opened it slowly. "Read in silence." Then read it again. Dakota saw the shift in her face, the way her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the letter. It was from a lawyer in Kansas. The land Thomas had once claimed, before it was stolen, was being disputed again. A railway company had found traces of oil beneath it. The map may have burned, but whispers of its contents still stirred greedy hearts. Someone had betrayed them. Again, Dakota folded the letter and looked at her. "You want to go back?" Amelia's expression was calm, but fierce. "No, I want to end it." He smiled. "Then we ride at dawn." Final scene. The sun set over the valley, painting it gold and crimson. The twins sat by the fire, listening as Dakota played the cedar flute, its notes high and haunting. Amelia packed her bag carefully, maps, letters, the pendant he had carved her. As she stood, ready to leave, she turned back once more. "Do you think it ever ends?" she asked softly. Dakota looked at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "No," he said, "but some storms you ride through. Others you become." She smiled, her heart full and heavy all at once. Behind her, the wind carried a sound from far off, wheels on tracks. A warning, a future not yet written. And as they disappeared into the dusk, 2 shadows on horseback and 2 small ones behind, the valley watched them go. Because some stories don't end. They echo. And somewhere, in the distance, the next chapter waits.